In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplin Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplin's Report this morning, again, comes from the book of Ruth, and I really have enjoyed our time in Ruth. I think that it says a lot about us and there's a lot of life lessons that even though we're reading about people that these events happened thousands of years ago, I think it really is amazing to show how little human beings have changed, and also goes to show how a lot of the things that they were dealing with are things that we're dealing with, and we can use the solutions that they had to help us out. And today is no different. We're winding down. We're getting close to the end of the story of Ruth and Boaz. And what has essentially happened, if you remember from yesterday's Chaplin's Report, is that Ruth has gone forward. She has shown an act of kindness towards Boaz. She's shown that she cares about him, and essentially that she's interested in and wants to be with him. And Boaz has responded by saying that your rapport is amazing. You have been shown to be a woman of great excellence, of moral character, and because of that, I'd like to redeem you. And what he means by redemption is this is someone who was a widow. She is the former wife of someone who was a relative of Boaz. And so because of that, you have the ability to redeem another person's wife. So just to give you an understanding of exactly how this is going to work, is that back then, if there was a woman, and this is largely because women had a hard time providing for themselves because most of the labor back then was physical labor. And women, of course, were not as well equipped to handle that as most men were. And because of that, if you didn't have a man, if you were not married, you didn't have a son, you didn't have a father to take care of you, it was a much, much more difficult time in the world to make it as a woman on your own than it was in the time period that we're looking at. And so because of that, part of the Mosaic law is that if you had a brother or a nearest of kin who died, it was your responsibility to take care of them. Now, you also got the benefits of that. In other words, you got the land, you got the property, but you also were held responsible for raising up seed to your brother's wife. And you had to marry her and take care of her and bring her into your home and all of those things. All the things that come with a standard marriage, which there's a couple lessons to learn there. First of all, back then you had to really like your in-laws. And the reason for that was you had to really, for example, if you had a brother or you had a cousin and they wound up marrying a woman, you had to kind of make sure that you liked her too, because there was a chance that if she did not have a child before her husband died, that you were then going to be responsible for making sure that she had a child. And so you really do have to sit back and wonder, man, if we were living with that today, can you imagine how many more family disputes would be over who you were going to marry and bring into the family? They say that you're marrying into the family. You're not just marrying the person, you're marrying the family now. Well, that was especially true back then because there was a possibility that if your brother did not have an heir, it was up to you to make sure that the family name carried on through her. And so let's go ahead and look at this verse, because understanding that context is really going to help us understand sort of the situation that Ruth and Boaz find themselves in. So Boaz really wants to marry Ruth, but he is not the next to kin. He is the next to kin. So there's another guy involved in this, and he goes forward and he tells the nearest kin, the person that would actually be next in line to redeem Ruth, he makes him aware of the situation and asks if he wants to be the one to redeem her. So let's look at Ruth 4, verses 4 through 6. So I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you who to redeem it, and I am after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. The closest relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, because I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself. You may have any right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. So this is Ruth's next of kin speaking to Boaz, and Boaz is saying, look, I want to follow the law. I want to do the right thing. So if you want to redeem that land, if you want to partake of that, and want to make it your responsibility to acquire Ruth and raise up seed based on the death of her husband because of that, then you have the right, you have first dibs on that. And he says, you know what? That would jeopardize my own inheritance. I'd like to, but that's going to be a problem for me. And so, Boaz, you go ahead, you take Ruth, you take the land from Naomi, and you're going to be the one in charge of that. So that says a couple of things. First of all, blessings come with responsibilities. So he's getting the blessing of a wife, and he's also getting the blessing of the land that was owned by Elimelech, his relative that was married to Ruth. But with that also comes a responsibility. He now has to cultivate the land, he has to use it to be profitable, and he has to use it to support Elimelech's wife, Ruth. And so he's going to purchase it from Naomi because she is now the rightful heir, or she is now the rightful owner of that land. And so when he goes out to redeem it, he doesn't just get it for free. He has a responsibility to make sure that Naomi, the deceased mother, is taken care of, and also to take care of Ruth and make sure she's okay too. And so this is the way that it actually pretty often works with God. We have grace and mercy from Jesus Christ, and while they are certainly free gifts, they are also conditional. Our freedom from the old law comes with a responsibility to do the right thing. There's a verse that I played on my show I don't know how many times, in Galatians 5:1, for example, where it talks about freedom, and it says you're not free to go out and do sin. We see that also in Romans 6. There's countless situations and countless verses that we could use to back this up. But it's not just, well, I'm under grace, so I can sin and do whatever I want to. It's, you have been blessed, ergo, you have a responsibility to live by this law and do the right thing. Now that you've got that freedom, you could theoretically do this, but the point is you shouldn't. And so don't use your liberty as a cause for evil or as an excuse to do bad things. You use your freedom and couple that with responsibility. So if a blessing comes along, you are responsible to take care of it, and you're responsible for doing what you can to make sure it comes forward. And that's exactly what Boaz is concerned about. He wanted to follow the law, so he wanted to go to the next person that was going to be responsible for redeeming it, give him a say in what happened. And when he turned it down, he says, okay, then I'll take that responsibility on myself. I'll inherit the blessings as well, but I'm going to take the responsibility upon myself to make sure Ruth and Naomi are taken care of. And so making sure that they are able to provide for themselves was a part of the deal. And I do think that it's interesting that the way they handle this is that he has to pay Naomi to do that. In other words, Naomi was going to have the resources to fend for herself because she was now the person that owned the land. And he wasn't going to just take the land. That was not his role and not his responsibility. He's going to make sure Naomi is well compensated for the land that he is now going to use. And this is a really important step because it shows that when it came to God's people, he wanted people to take care of each other, but he wanted to do so in such a way that they were able to provide for themselves, not necessarily just getting a bunch of handouts. And this was something that is consistent throughout the old law. And I think really the lesson that this teaches us is it is such a shame that we have separated responsibility from relationships in almost every conceivable way. Part of the problems that we're having, whether it be homosexuality and other sexual perversions, or just simply having sex outside of the confines of marriage, which is what God intended it, is because we've removed responsibility from sex. When you are engaged in that kind of intimate relationship with somebody, your body makes a commitment whether you do or not. In fact, we've even seen that your brain makes a commitment whether you do or not. You are psychologically bound to that person when you do that. And granted, there are people that get kind of desensitized to it because they've done it so many times that it's kind of like having a part on your body that has been injured or hurt so many times it kind of builds up an immunity to the pain. That's kind of what happens when you're constantly connecting yourself to somebody like that and then separating and going your separate ways over and over and over again. You get desensitized it, but it doesn't mean the damage isn't still hurting. It isn't still happening. You may be numb to the pain, but it doesn't mean the thing that's causing the pain has gone away. And it doesn't mean that it's not still doing damage. And so what we've done is we're saying you can have all the benefits and all the fun of a relationship without having any of the responsibility. And what has that led to? That's led to kids without fathers. That's led to kids without mothers, frankly, even though that's rarer. And there have been kids that have been abandoned completely by their parents because of that. That's also led to both men and women being unfulfilled in their relationships, whether they understand why or not. The relationship has a lot more to do with it than just that, and because of that, and because they're not engaging in that side of it, they're being left unfulfilled and sitting there thinking, well, why isn't this working? And they continue, because of that, because they don't understand it, to continue to jump from relationship to relationship where they are intimate with somebody. And we have people that are so terrified of commitment now that they don't even want to discuss it. I mean, there are women that we look at dating almost as though it is, a softer version of marriage. And so because of that, we have men and women not even wanting to go out with one another or refer to themselves as a couple because they see that as some kind of big, grandiose commitment to one another. And they want to keep it casual. They want to not necessarily engage in that. But if you want to have a good, deep, meaningful relationship, you have to have some commitment. You have to bear some responsibility for the other person to be actually fulfilled. And that goes for men and women. It's not one-sided. It takes both. Because relationships have great benefits, and that's something that God intended for mankind. One of the first observation that he makes when he sees man, when he sees Adam, is it is not good for him to be alone. And so relationships are wonderful things, if you can find that. But at the end of the day, we have to keep in mind that they're also a responsibility. When God made Eve for Adam, she gave a lot of benefits and made his life richer. That's why she was made in the first place. But God also said, you're responsible for taking care of her. This is your obligation. And so when you remove the responsibility side from the fun side of a relationship, you wind up getting neither. Because those two things have to work in concert, or else it's eventually going to fall apart and leave both parties feeling unfulfilled. That's why the story of Ruth and Boaz is so great, is because these are two people that get it, that understand it, that want to be with one another, and want to do so because they have God at the center of their relationship, and they want to grow together as a couple spiritually towards Him. And that should be the goal of every single couple. And if they do so, that will be where they find real joy. Not necessarily only in each other, but more importantly, in God. Stay the course, friends.